All right, Shabbos, say good morning. We have a beautiful, beautiful Gemara ahead of us today. We are up to today's daf is Kuf Nun Aleph 151. We are picking up Kuf Nun Amud Beis 150b. 4 lines up from the bottom. Start. So also remember again, the Gemara was discussing the case if a person goes ahead and says Nechasai leploni. Right, my property should go to Ploni. So the Shaila said the Gemara was trying to figure out, not Shaila, but the Gemara was trying to discuss what's included in that statement of Nechasai. What items does that include? So the Gemara says 4 lines up in the bottom, Kuf Nun 150b, Shtara Ikr Nechasi. We'll say a shtar is called property. Amar Rabba Bar Yitzchak. Shnei shtarosein. There are 2 different types of shtaros. What are the 2 different types of shtaros? Amar Zochu B'Sada Zeh. So we'll say, if I say to witnesses, go ahead and acquire this field on behalf of Ruvain, and also write for him a document. So I'm telling the witnesses to be makabel kinyan, to acquire the field on behalf of Ruvain, and then I'm telling them to write a shtar as well. So what's the halacha? Chozer b'shtar v'ina chozer b'sada. So we'll say, so they have the right to go ahead, I have the right, to go ahead and recant or retract on giving the shtar, but not on the field. In other words, we'll say, once the Eidim have been makabel kinyan on the field, so the field belongs to Ruvain. The difference is that the shtar, the document itself, is just a shtar raya. It's a document of proof. And therefore, if I choose to tell the witnesses, I don't want you to write the shtar, I have the ability to do so. The Gemara says, on the other hand, if I say to witnesses, I want you to acquire this field for Reuven on the condition that you write the shtar, so in other words, I'm making the acquisition of the field dependent on the writing of the shtar. In other words, the shtar is going to be the mechanism through which the Eidim will acquire the field on behalf of Reuven. In that case, I will say, I have the ability to go ahead and retract both the field as well as the sod. There are in fact 3 cases of shtar. What are the 3 cases of shtar? Trey, honey danos. We'll say the 2 cases that we just mentioned before. Idach, the 3rd case is im kadam mocher v'kasav es hashtar. So let's listen to this. Let's say I plan on selling property to Ruvain, but what do? I go ahead and I pre-write the shtar. I pre-write the shtar even before the transaction happens. If you look at the last Rashbam on the page, in Kadam v'kasav shtar, mechira lios mezuman lelokeach kol shashi yirtza lemachro l'sadeu lo yeh eku b'ma'osav b'shul ksivas hashtar. So we'll say, so the idea over here is, I want to sell Reuven this field, and I know Reuven wants to buy this field. I want to seal the deal as quickly as possible, and I don't want the drafting of the paperwork to delay the transaction. So what do? I proactively write the shtar. So I'm not going to see Reuven till Friday, and it's only Monday. I go ahead and I proactively write the shtar. So just look at the Rashbam on the top of Kuf Nun Aleph Amud Aleph. The only person who is put out, when you go ahead and you write the shtar early is the seller. Because technically speaking, if the seller accidentally loses that shtar, and let's say purchaser goes ahead and finds it, so the purchaser would have the ability to go ahead and claim that he owns the field when in fact he never paid for it. If the seller is willing to take that risk and pre-write the shtar in order that it is ready at the time of the transaction, so the transaction could occur quickly, then again the halacha says he can do so. So the top of Kuf Nun Aleph, Kosin shtar lemocher, afa pi she'en lo ke'achimo. We write a shtar for the seller, even though the purchaser is not with him. And what happens, I will say, when the transaction ultimately occurs? Kevan shehichzik zeh bekarka nikne shtar kol makom shehu. We'll say, so in that case, where the shtar was pre-written, so as soon as Reuven acquires the land, through the kinyan on the land, he also acquires the shtar wherever it may be. V'zohi sheshaninu, and this is what we learn, nechasim she'en lehen achrayis, niknin in nechasim she'esh lehen achrayis, bekesef b'shtar b'chazaka. And both say this is what we learned when we said that movable property can be acquired with real property through kesef, shtar, and chazaka. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that a shtar is called nechasim she'en lehen achrayis. It's called again movable property. So therefore, again, when a person goes ahead and conveys his property nechasai to another individual, so what happens? So the Maisa again, that includes the shtar. Fine. Behema. Suppose to say similarly again, behema ikri nechasi. An animal is also called property. Where do we know this? From this nan. Hamakdish nechasa v'hisa b'han behema ru'il gabi mizbeach. If a person consecrated his property. I made my property hagdish, and included in my property were animals, and there are animals who are fit for carbonic service. Zecharim olos, so the male animals are offered up as an olah. Unikevos yimkru letzarchei zivchei shlamim, and the female animals are sold, and ultimately again are used, or they themselves or their monies are used for zivchei shlamim. Fine. Ofos ikrin nechasi. Birds are called property. So we'll say again, we're just going through the list of all the things that are included if you make the open-ended statement of nechasai leploni. My property goes to ploni. What's included in that? Next, birds are called property. This nan hamaktish nechasavayu behen dvarm haruyin gabi mizbeach yenos shmanim va'ofos. Because it will say the pasuk says that the Mishnah says that if a person consecrates his property and included in his estate are things that are fit for the mizbeach, like wine, oil, and birds. So you see from here that birds are considered property. Tefillin, we'll say tefillin are called ikri nechasi. Tefillin are called property. This nan hamaktish nechasav. If a person consecrates his property, ma'alin lo tefillin. We assess the value of his tefillin. So you see that tefillin is also called property. And we'll say, ask the Gemara something so beautiful. Libai lahu sefer Torah mai. We'll say, what happens if a person possesses a sefer Torah? What's the halacha about Sefer Torah? Look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Sefer Torah, min mikri nichase kitfilin. Min mikri nichasi. Is Sefer Torah called property? On one hand, kitfilin dami. So is it like a religious article like tefillin? And just as we've established that tefillin is considered to be property, so Sefer Torah is property as well. O dilma tefillin hainu taima dahavi malbush. Aval sefer mitzvahi v'lo nechasi. So we'll say, listen to this. On the other hand, tefillin, and this is actually quite interesting, tefillin has the din of a malbush, of an article of clothing. So maybe since we know this, we'll say, because remember again, we learned about this concept in Masechah Shabbos, right? If a person finds multiple pairs of tefillin out, and right, let's say again in a place where they can't carry, so a person has and let's say they're going to be ruined, so a person has the ability to put on the tefillin even on Shabbos in order to transport them. Isn't that carrying? No, that's called wearing, because tefillin has a certain din of a malbush. So what's the status of a Sefer Torah? Is it like tefillin is as a religious article, or maybe tefillin is different because at the end of the day, tefillin still has a quasi din of a malbush, of an article of clothing, whereas the Sefer Torah does not. To which the Gemara says, "Kivan delo mizdabin da asr lezabune lav nechasi." Well, I would say the following. Well, since on one hand, we'll say you are not allowed to sell a Sefer Torah. And we'll say, we learned this, remember again in Maseches Megillah, the Gemara there discusses all of the halachos of selling religious articles. So generally the halacha is, you're allowed to sell a religious article if what? If you're going to use the proceeds to buy something of a higher sanctity. So I could go ahead and sell chumashim if I'm going to go ahead and buy a Sefer Torah. But generally the halacha is, you cannot sell a Sefer Torah. So do we say kevan, so I'm sorry, I'm sorry, so on one hand, Kevan de lo mizdabin, Kevan de lo mizdabin, the asr lezabon elav nechasi. On one hand, I would say, since it can't be sold, that shows that's not my property. On the other hand, Dilma, Kevan de mizdabin lilmo Torah v'lisa isha nechasafu. Well, so on the other hand, there is a license to sell a Sefer Torah when? If a person needs to go ahead and learn. And I need the tuition, right? I need to go ahead, I need to be able to go to the yeshiva to learn. I could sell the Torah, use the proceeds to learn. Or, person needs to get married and they don't have the funds to be able to make the chassan. A person could sell a Sefer Torah ultimately for that purpose. So in that respect, I can sell a Sefer Torah for certain of my own personal needs. Does that not make it my property? To which the Gemara says, Teku. So we'll say out of all of these, again, although we've been definitive that all of these other things are called when it comes to Sefer Torah, the Gemara ends off with the Teku. On one hand, I have the ability to sell it for certain needs. That should make it like my property. On the other hand, I don't have a carte blanche to just sell it in any way that I want, so perhaps it's not my property. Because of this ambiguity, the Gemara ends off with the Teku. Weiter. We're going to tell us a couple of stories, I will say, that are quite interesting. Just halachic stories. Ime de Rav Zutra bar Tuvia. Listen to this. The mother of Rav Zutra bar Tuvia, Kasvinu lenechase l'Rav Zutra bar Tuvia. So I'll say, so the mother of Rav Zutra wrote her property. Bepashtus, this sounds like a matnas shchimira. We'll see it in just a moment. I'm sorry, this is not the matnas shchimira yet. Kasvinu lenechase Rav Zutra bar Tuvia, tebailin subile, l'Rav Zivid. So we'll say, so the mother of Rav Zutra the mother of Rav Zutra was getting married. She was marrying Rav Zavid. And remember, like we saw yesterday, she did not want her new husband to have any rights in her property. So what does she do? She goes ahead and she gifts the property over to her son. Now again, in her mind, the understanding is what? I'm gifting this to you in order that you can go, in order that my new husband has no rights in this property. But should for some reason the marriage fail, then what? I want my property back. So what happens? In Sibah, so sure enough, she got married to Rav Zavid, Vigarsha, and they got divorced. We'll say first wide line. So what happens? We'll say, so she comes back to her son, Rav Zutra, for the property, and apparently Rav Zutra says, no. Rav Zutra says, no, you gave it to me as a gift, and I don't have to give it back to you. So we'll say they brought the Psak Halacha before Rabbi Bar Abaye. So what happens? So the Gemara says the following. The Gemara says, fine. So Amar Mishum Insubi, Vaha Insube. So what happens? We'll say, so Rabbi Bar Abaye passed in an interesting way. He says, at the end of the day, this was a gift given on the condition that she marries, and she married. Now, we'll say, Rabbi Bar Abaye understood that the gift was a final gift. He understood that the mother was saying to her son, I'm giving you this gift on the condition that I get married, which meant, had she never gotten married, the gift would not have been valid. But now that she did get married, the gift was valid, and she has no recourse to get the property back. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Vaha inseve, ve'efsida, dekana b'na, Rabbi Bar Abaye literally says, we view this as a gift al Tanai, but a different kind of Tanai. The Tanai is, I'm giving you this gift on the condition that I get married. Once I get married, the gift is final. What are you talking about? So we've seen this expression before. So says to Rabbi Bar Abaye. So let's remember again, Rabbi is the son of Abaye. Abaye is a descendant of Eli Cohen. The family of Eli Cohen was cursed that the male members of the family will die young. This is a result, ultimately, again, of the transgressions of Chafni and Pinchas, Eli's two sons. So comes along Rav Huna. He says to Rabbi Bar Abaye, because you come from Mimuloim, because you come literally from the stunted ones. It can either mean blemished ones, stunted ones, truncated ones. So because you come from these blemished people, Amrisu Mili Mulaisa, you say blemished stuff, which is another way of saying, I politely disagree with what it is that you've just advanced. So we'll say, because remember, even the one who says that Mavreches is the case of where a wife is getting married, a woman is getting married, she does not want her new husband to have any rights in her assets, and so she goes ahead and gives it over to her children. See, even according to Mandar, who says that Mavreches is Kani, Hani Mili Heicha Delo Gal Yadaita, Aval Hacha Gal Yadaita Dimishum in Subihu, Vaha in Seba the Girsha. So we'll say, so comes along with Rabbi Yeshua and says to Rabbi Bar Abaye, what are you talking about? In this case, it's clear that the mother of Rav Zutra, was clearly only giving this property to her son. Why? In order to create a shelter so that ultimately her new husband should not have any rights in the property. So there's what we call a gilui das, a clear expression of intent. And I will say, wherever there is a clear expression of intent, then what? Then ultimately, again, that becomes the Tanai. The Tanai was not, I'm giving you my property on the condition that I get married. And once I get married, the property is yours. It's clear that the gilui das, the expression of intent, I will say, was what? I don't want my new husband to have rights in the property. Therefore, I'm gifting you this property for the duration of my marriage. But it is understood that should the marriage dissolve, then what? Then ultimately the gift is cancelled and the property returns back to the mother of Rav Zutra. So the Gemara goes weiter. Another story. So just by the way, if you take a quick look at the Rashbam, Mimuloi, the Rashbam writes over here, Da Abaye Aviv Mishpachas Beis Eli. So remember again, Abaye, the father of Rav Bibi, was from the family of Eli HaKohen. Kidarminon Abaye Vram Mishpachas Beis Eli Kasu. V'zev Shem Mekoman B'Breishis Rabba. Reb Meir Azo Lememala Ra'a Osan Shein Shchorirosh. So we'll say, so some say that Mulai is actually the name of their birthplace. That was the name of the actual place. Milu Mulai, Sadr Rashbam says, Bali Mumin Shein Bahen Mamish. We'll say, so again, the Rashbam then seems to change course a little bit. Either it's a play on words, the name of the place, or the Rashbam ultimately says that ultimately Mishum Da'asi Mimulai could either mean the name of the place that they came from, or it could be an expression of being blemished. Because you come from blemished people, do not say blemished things. So Baraman Rabbi say what we get out of this story is that Lamaisa, Rav Huna Breit Rav Yoshua disagreed with Rav Bibi, and Paskin that the mother of Rav Zutra got back her property that she gifted to her son before she got married to her second husband, and upon the dissolution of that second marriage through divorce, the property goes back to the mother. Next case, Ime Draim Bar Chama. The mother of Draim Bar Chama will say, again, now Bepashtos, this is a case, ultimately again, this is going to be a case of Shemira. So what happens? The mother of Draim Bar Chama, in the evening, so we'll say in the evening, Rai Bar Chama went to visit his mother, and she wrote over all of her property to him. But Safra in the morning, so we'll say, let's see what happened over here. In the evening, she gave it to her first son, Rai Bar Chama. She gave all of her property to her first son. In the morning, she decided to go ahead and write all of that property to her second son, to Rav Ukva Bar Chama, brothers. So we'll say, so what's the Shaila? The Shaila, of course, is who is the owner of the property? Also, Rai Bar Chama l'knei Rav Sheshas. So Rai Bar Chama, we'll say the son who received the property in the evening, went before Rav Sheshas, Ukmei benechase, and Rav Sheshas paskin that indeed the property belonged to the first son, to Rami Bar Chama. Also, Rav Ukva Bar Chama kamed Rav Nachman. Rav Ukva Bar Chama, the second son of Basra, received the property in the morning, went to Rav Nachman, and had Rav Nachman paskin Ukmei benechase, and Rav Nachman paskin that Rav Ukva, the second son, was the owner of the property. So I will say, so now what are we going to do? Asar Rav Sheshas kamed Rav Nachman. So Rav Sheshas came before Rav Nachman. Rav Sheshas says, Amalei, my time Ukmei mar l'Rav Ukva Bar Chama. Rav Sheshas, why are you paskening that the property belongs to the second son, Rav Ukva Bar Chama? In other words, why would you uphold the gift to the second son? Imishum dehadraba. If you want to say because we view ultimately again that the mother retracted her first gift, that ultimately again she changed her mind. She first gave it to Rami, and then she decided to give it to Rav Ukva. So the Gemara says, "V'hashchiva," she died. She died. Now, what does that mean? Look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam's gear says V'hamesa. It's 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines up from the bottom, towards the middle of the line. V'hamesa. Dibishlamim lo mesa tanan lo shia karka kol shem matana samatana ukimo shechazu min arishon kishnas l'sheni taxer ba min hasheni nami im tirsa aval ata shemesa tiskayi matana rishona v'yikna rishon shaynatna b'matnas shchimira udvara kechsurim l'chimsurim ukishemesa for the armina daitikim adas daitikim. Let's listen to this. So Rav Sheshis comes along and says, listen, this was a matna shchimira. The Post say, what happens in the matna shchimira? We say, Divrei Shchimira, Kichzuvin, V'chimsurin Damu. That ultimately, again, a gift of a Shchimira is like it's written and sealed. So therefore, once the mother gave the property to Rami, then what I will say, it was written, sealed, and done. She no longer has the right to go ahead and change her mind and give it the next morning to Rav Ukva. So the Gemara says, Amarlei, Hachi Amar Shmuel. But see, he responded, so Rav Nachman responds back, Rav Sheshas responds back. Rav Nachman responds back to Rav Sheshas, and he said, Amar lehachim Shmuel, this is what Shmuel said, Kol she'ilu amad chozer b'matanaso. So Shmuel said, I will say, any time that if a person were to recover, the gift would be cancelled, they have the right to go ahead and change their mind about the gift. Which I will say, that's a matna shchimira. A matna shchimira is any gift where if a person recovers, ultimately again, the gift is voided. They have the right before they die to change the intended recipient. Which I will say makes sense because what is that another way of saying? If you have the right, if you recover, the gift is voided. I will say it's another way of saying that's what? That the gift is not chal until when? until you die. Which means that if it's not chal until I die, I have the right to change my intended recipient as many times as I want before I die. So therefore, again, in this case of Yerabosai, the mother was gifting all of her property. This was a matna shchiv meira. And were she to recover, ultimately, again, the gift would be voided. If that's the case, she has the right to change the intended recipient as many times as she wants. So, okay, in the evening she gave it to Rami, the next morning she gave it to Rav Ukva, but that's her prerogative, and therefore Rav Ukva, the second son, is really the rightful owner of the property. To which the Gemara says, Eimar Damar Shmuel Yatzmo. So maybe Shmuel's din is only when what? When the individual ultimately is changing their mind and taking the property back to themselves. However, la'acher mi amar, but what Shmuel actually says halacha, even when it comes to gifting it to another, he said yes. Shmuel said this explicitly. Bein liatzmo, bein la'acher. Both say that ultimately the shchimera can change his mind, and he could choose ultimately to gift the property to a second recipient, or he could choose to take the property back for himself. Either way, that is his prerogative. In other words, both say any gift which, if I recover, ultimately again will be voided, I have the right to change the recipient as many times as I want. Therefore, again, Rav Nachman says back to Rav Sheshes that halacha l'maisa, again, the mother had absolutely every right to go ahead and change the intended recipient from Rami in the evening, ultimately again to Rav Ukva in the morning. Next case, we'll say. So, by the way, and that indeed is halacha l'maisa. We accept Shmuel's principle that any time if you were to recover the gift is void, you have the right during this period of time between the giving of the gift and death to change the intended recipient as many times as you want. So what is the interesting anomaly? See, even though we say that the words of a shchimira are as if they're written in a shtar, that's true and it's not true. Meaning they have the power as if they're written in a shtar, but yet what? The shchimira has the right to change his or her mind as many times as they want. Good. So in this case, ultimately the halacha said that the property was awarded to the second son to Rav Ukva, the son who was awarded the property by his mother in the morning. Next case. Imid Rav Amram Chasida, Havi Le Maluga the Shtari. So we'll say the mother of Rav Amram Chasida had a Maluga the Shtari. The Rashbam says over here, Krach Shal Shtaros, Inami Nartik Mal Shtaros. A bag filled with documents, right? Loan documents, meaning money that was owed to her. So the Gemara says, so what happens? Kika Shachva, when she died, Amra Lehavi La Amram Bari. So we'll say, so what happens? So she said, when I die, ultimately, again, I want this to go to Amram, my son. Right? I want all of this to be inherited. So Rashbam writes over here, Hanila Amram b'ni, kigon shekanomi yada, inay below kinyan, and kigon below shayra midi. So we'll say either there was a kinyan performed, or Lamai says no kinyan performed. This was a matna shchimira. She was gifting away her whole estate. But she said explicitly, and I'm both saying now, in this case over here, her statement just covers this bag filled with loan documents. So she's saying, I want all this to go to Amram, my son. So what happens? Asach Rav Nachman. So Rav Amram Chasida's brothers come before Rav Nachman. So the mother dies, and they come before Rav Nachman. And what do the brothers say? Amrulei Vaha Lo Mashach. So Amram shouldn't really acquire it. Why? Because he never did Mashicha. Right? This should be split up amongst us all. Amr Lahu, to which Rav Nachman responded, Divrei Shchimira Keksuvim Dichim Surim Damu. It was like he was writing. Why? I will say because the words of a Shchimira are as if ultimately again they're recorded in a document. Good. Achseid Rav Tuvi bar Rav Masna. So we'll say the sister of Rav Tuvi bar Rav Masna. Chasvinu l'nechasi Rav Tuvi bar Rav Masna b'tzafra. So what happens? So the sister of Rav Tuvi bar Masna was dying, and she wrote all of her property to her brother Rav Tuvi. And now this happened in the morning. Lepanya, in the evening, Asar of Achtaboy bar Rav Masna. So we'll say she has another brother. So remember, sister's dying, she writes her property to her brother Rav Tuvi. Rav Tuvi and this sister have another brother, a man by the name of Rav Achtaboy. So in that evening, Rav Achtaboy comes to visit his sister, Bachala. He begins to cry to her. And what does he say? Amar la hashta amri mar tzura merabanon umar lav tzura merabanon. So he says to his sister, if you leave all of the property to Rav Mari, if you leave all the property Rav Tuvi, you leave all the property to Rav Tuvi, and you leave nothing to me, then what? Everyone's going to say that you left it to Rav Tuvi because he was a great Talmud Chacham, and the fact that I got nothing indicates that what? That I'm not a Talmud Chacham. So what happens? So the Gemara says, Kasvinu nihile. So the sister changed her mind, and she wrote the entire estate to Rav Achtaboy. right? So in the evening, or I should say in the morning, ultimately again Rav Tuvi was the inheritor of the estate. Comes evening, the sister changed her mind and ultimately gives it to Rav Achtaboy. So we'll say, so now she dies. The shaila is what? Who is the owner of the estate? So they came up for Rav Nachman. Amar lei, haki amar Shmuel. This is what Shmuel said. Kol she'ilu amad chozer matnasa. So we'll say again, it's just an illustration of the same principle. Shmuel said, any gift, we'll say, where if the person recovers, the gift is voided, that means the gift is not chal until the death of the person, which means they have the right to change the intended recipient as many times as they want. Therefore, again, Rav Tuvi, I'm sorry, but ultimately, Rav Achtaboy is the owner of the estate. Achse Dravdimi Bar Yosef. Well, that case is also interesting, by the way, because it's an interesting case of where you actively have a second party lobbying for the transfer of the assets to them, right? In other words, the second party influencing the grantor ultimately to gift it to them. But again, assuming that we could establish that the grantor had proper capacity, they have the right to change the intended recipient however they want. Achse Dravdimi Bar Yosef. Also, listen to this. The sister of Ravdimi Bar Yosef, Havale Piskasa de Pardisa, had a small orchard. Kol Imas Tavachalsha, Hava Makayin Einahela. And I was saying every time she became sick, so she wasn't married, didn't have children. So what happens? Every time she became sick, she went ahead and she would convey ownership of this property to her brother Ravdimi. So we'll say, listen to this. So the Gemara said that he kaimus have a hadraba. But yeah, so we'll say, so apparently, again, I know what the mitzvah is over here. I don't know if she was one of those people who was always dying, and therefore, again, because whenever mamish, like this is the end, this is it, so she would convey ownership of the property to her brother, or maybe Nebuch, she was just mamish, just a very sickly lady. Whatever the mitzvah is, every single time she thought she was at death's door, she would convey the property to Rav Dimi. But then ultimately, again, when she would recover, she would take it back from him. So we'll say, so watch this. Zimna chada chalsha. So we'll say, so apparently what used to happen was, she would, watch this. Zimna chada. So one time chalsha, she became once again very ill. Very ill. Look at the Rashbam for just no. Actually, no, we have to look. Zimna chada chalsha. One time she became very ill. Shal chale ta kani. So she sent for her brother Rav Dimi, right? Rav Dimi. She sent for her brother Rav Dimi. She said, "Come to me and acquire my property." Shalach lo ba'ina. He said, "No, I'm tired of this already. I'm not coming again." So shal chale ta kani kol heicha de bois. So listen to this. So she sent to him. Look at this lashon. Talk, honey, come and acquire kol heicha debos in any way that you want. Now look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Ta v'kani kol heicha debos ba'ata elai uknei asada bekinyan gomer b'chol inyan shetirza shelo uchal lachzar. So he's frustrated. I will say, why exactly this would cause him frustration is not immediately clear. It could be that what happens, it sounds like what happens here, is even though again she didn't need him to come to her to make a matna shchidnira, she was always summoning him to her bedside, right, for her last will and request. And then what happens? So she summons him. She takes back the property. So I'm not coming. I'm tired of this already. So she says, "Here's the deal. If you come now, I will give you the property in an irrevocable fashion." Or as part of his frustration is, he's coming, he's getting the property, she recovers, she takes back the property. It's a waste of my time. So she says to him, if you come now, I will let you acquire the property in a way that creates an irrevocable gift. Come and acquire it bekinyan gomer, b'chol inyan shatir shel uchal lachzar. So if you come now, this is the last time we'll deal with this property. I'm going to give it to you, and it's yours forever. So we'll say, so what happens? So Azal, Rav Dimi shows up. Shaira vikanu mina. So what happens, Rabbi say? So ultimately, again, he said, okay, here's what I want you to do. Do you have other property in your estate? She said, yes. He said, fine. I want you to withhold something for yourself and just give me this particular orchard. Rabbi say, so what does that do? Matna shchimira is defined as what? When someone gives away their entire estate. If the shchimira retains something for themselves, then the status of what they give away is the status of what? Just a regular bona fide matana. So he says to her, keep something for yourself, give me the paradise, Shalom al Yisrael. Now I own the orchard. Take a look at the Rashba for just a moment. Azul asa v'shayir v'kanomine, lo ratz lekabel kol asada, el shir la'atzmam ma'at, dahavle matana miktas, va'ayidei kinyan dekim la'akamad l'mat. Fine, so it says the Gemara. So what happens? Sure enough, Baruch Hashem, ki kaima, she recovers. She recovers. Now what happens again after like the 75th miraculous recovery? Hadraba, she wants the orchard back. She wants the orchard back. So I'll say, so watch this. So they brought, so obviously, Rav Dimi is saying, no. Remember, we went through this. You told me I could acquire the property no matter what. We did a proper kinyan. The property that you gave me was not a matna shchemira, so I'm not giving it back to you. So they brought the case before Rav Nachman. So listen to this, both sides. So the sister goes to Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman, this is very dramatic. Rav Nachman summons Rav Dimi. Shalach le ta. He says to Rav Dimi, come to Beis Din. Lo asa. Rav Dimi does not show up. Amar mai. So the Gemara says, Amar mai isi. Why should I come? Ha shaire v'kano mina. I don't understand. Rav Nachman, you know the halacha, I know the halacha. Why do I need to show up in Beis Din? Meaning, we're not disputing the facts. The facts are that I came to her bedside, I acquired the pardes, she retained property for herself. It's not a matnas shchemira, it's a regular matana. There's no discussion over here. Why do I have to show up in Beis Din? So listen to this. Rav Nachman says, Shalach lei. So Rav Nachman sends to Rav Dimi, Shalach lei. Ilo asis, if you don't show up, machina lecha besilu delo mavadama. I'm going to strike you with a thorn that does not draw blood. So Nachman says, if you do not show up on the strike, what does that mean? Take a look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam says, besilu delo mavadama, kot shemachiv, a thorn that causes pain, ve'en yitzias dam nikarbo, dahainu nidui. So we'll say, Rav Nachman threatens Rav Dimi, if you do not show up to Beis Din, I'm going to excommunicate you. I'm going to put you in Chayr. So we'll say again, the halacha is, you have to show up in Beis Din. A person gets hazmana to Beis Din, you could disagree, you could argue, you could do whatever you want, but you have to acknowledge it. You have to acknowledge it. So Rav Nachman says, Rav Dimi, you have no right, you might be Rav Dimi, but you have no right to not show up in Beis Din. So listen to this. So, fast forward, Rav Nachman shows up in Beis Din. So Rav Nachman is there with his Baruch Hashem newly healed sister. What happens? They're adjudicating what do we do with the orchard. So says the Gemara. So Amar Lahu Lasadi. So Rav Nachman says, Rav Nachman Rabbi, his members, is heading the Beis Din. He says to the witnesses, because they will say B'Pashtus, they did this transaction in front of witnesses because the goal was that the transaction should stand. So Nachman says to the witnesses, "Nu heichi hava maisa." Tell me what happened. What happened to Rav Dimi and his sister? So the witnesses said, "Amra hachi." At the time of the transaction, the sister said the following: "Vai de kamisa hach isasa." Nebach, right? Woe that this sister is going to die. Look at the Rashba. We'll say for just a moment. The Rashba says, "Avai ki misa hach isasa v'lo tira es acheha she'la rotza lavo elai." So the witnesses said that when the sister called for her brother, so she said, "Woe to me that I'm going to die and I'm not going to see my brother." So we'll say, so what did Rav Nachman just establish? Rav Nachman just established that the motivation for this gift was what? Her imminent death. Obviously not so imminent, but her imminent death. So that's why she's sending for her brother. I'm going to die. My brother hasn't even come to see me. So we see the motivation for this entire transaction was her death. Rav Nachman therefore says something amazing. Im came hava mitzave machmas misa, or mitzave machmas misa choser. Rav Nachman says something absolutely amazing. Rav Nachman says it is clear contextually that the entire motivation for this transaction was what, Rabbosai? Her impending death. That was the entire motivation. Therefore, Rav Nachman says we have something called now being introduced to a new concept of mitzaveh machmas misa. Mitzaveh machmas misa means when it is clear from the context, and this mostly we're going to has to actually be articulated, that a person is only gifting their property away because they think they are going to die. Even though they are not conforming to a typical matnas shchemira, which is where a person is divesting themselves of all of their property, but it's clear that they're giving away their property because they think they're going to die. That's called mitzvah machmas misa. Mitzvah machmas misa is like what? is like a gift al t'nai. It's like a gift with a condition. And therefore, again, should the person recover, ultimately, again, the gift is zera. We'll say, take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Im ke mitzvah machmas misahi, v'cho mitzvah machmas misa, chozer. We'll say, any time, ultimately, again, you give a gift, and it's clear that the giving of that gift is motivated by a feeling that a person is going to die imminently. So ultimately, if they don't die, chozer b'matana b'mitzas b'matana below shir. V'afilu kanu miyado. The boss said, listen to this. So even if I thought I was going to die, I gave some property to someone, and I went ahead and I made a kinyan with them, and I didn't give away my whole estate. But if it's clear that the motivation for the gift is the impending death of the grantor, of the giver, if that person recovers, hadar bekulu, bi'adua shelo haya kinyan ela machmas misa, hoil v'haya misonin al misasa be'is sabaso v'achi paskin ala kaman. Rabbi say, if a person clearly articulates that the motivation for this transaction is their death, then that's called mitzvah machmas misa. Mitzvah machmas misa, Rabbi say, is the equivalent of giving a gift with a t'nai, and therefore should the person recover, ultimately again the gift is void. Therefore, Rav Nachman's paskins that because the sister made it clear that she is sending for her brother and engaging in this transaction. Why? Because she thinks she's going to die, that the motivation for this gift was her impending death. Therefore, when she recovers, the gift is void, the pardes goes back to her. Rabbi say, even though what? Even though she retained property for herself, and even though they did an actual kinyan. Incredible. Itmar. So also we're going to expound on this a little bit. Itmar. Matna shchimera b'mixas. So also what happens if a shchimera only gives away part of his property? So Amru Rabbanan K'mei Rav Mishmei Rav Zutra, Beid Rav Nachman, Rav Mishmei Rav Nachman, Hari Kimatnas Bari, Vari Kimatnas Shchimera. So we'll say, if a shchimera gives away part of his property, so in certain respects, that gift is like the gift of a shchimera, but in certain respects, it's also like the gift of a bari. How so? So the Gemara says, Hari kimat nas bari, shem amad ino chozer. So we'll say on one hand, it's like the matana of a bari, in that if the shchimera recovers, he cannot retract the gift. B'pashtos, this is because he did not give away his entire estate. V'hari kimat nas shchimera, telo ba'ina kinya. But I will say it's like a man nas shchimera, and that a kinya is not necessary. Amrlu Rava. Rava said, come on. Lava mina lochu. Lo titlu buki sriki Rav Nachman. Have I not told you many times not to hang empty jugs on Rav Nachman? Which I will say apparently is like a Talmudic shtoch. It's like another way of saying like empty jugs means you're saying stuff with absolutely no content. You're attributing statements to Rav Nachman that Rav Nachman himself did not make. Hachiyom Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said, Harihi kemat nasbari ubaya kinyan. Rav Nachman said that anytime a shchimira just goes in and conveys partial property, that is like a matnas bari, and in order for that gift to be binding, ultimately again you'd have to do makabel kinyan. So Rav raised the kasha to Rav Nachman, shir karka kol shu matanasa kayemes. Yet Rav we learned that what? That if a person goes ahead, the shchimira retains some property for himself, then what's the halacha? Shir karka kolshu matanasa kames. Also remember, what does matanasa kames mean? Matanasa kames means that even if the person does not die, the gift still stands. In other words, we'll say when the shchimira conveys property, but retains some property for himself, it is no longer categorized as a matnas shchimira. Rather, it's categorized as a regular matana, which means it's an unconditional gift, which means that even if the shchimira recovers, the matana still stands. My lab de lo kanomine. Are we not talking about a case where there was no Kabbalah's kinyan? To which the Gemara says, no, the kanomine. No, there was Kabbalah's kinyan. Iachi ema seifa lo shir karka kol shu ein matanasa kayemes. But yet then look at the seifa. When the seifa says that the shchimira did not retain any property for himself, the matana is not kayem. V'i the kanomine. And if there was Kabbalah's kinyan, amai ein matanasa kayemes, then why isn't the matana kayem if there was a real Kabbalah's kinyan? Let's get ready for this. This is what Shmuel said. Shchimira. Shekasav kol mechasav la'achirim. It was like a Shmuel paskins the following: that when the shchimira gives away all of his property to others, afal pi shekanu miyado. It was say even if they did a kinyan. So let's say it was saying in this case shchimira is inviting the people to his bedside. He tells them, "Listen, I'm giving you my property, and let's do Kabbalah's kinyan. I want to do a kinyan with you." Nevertheless, amad chozer. If the shchimira recovers, the gift is void. Why? Biyadua shelo haya mitzava ela machmas misa. Because it is understood that the only reason that Shchimira is giving him his property is why? Is because he thinks he's about to die. So we'll say, you see the incredible novelty? See, we only thought that a matan of a Shchimira perhaps is cancelable or is voidable when the Shchimira recovers and there was no Kabbalah's Kinyan. But if he formalized the transaction through a Kinyan, who's to say that he has the ability to go ahead and cancel the transaction? Comes along Shmuel's Snow. That we have this now, this overarching framework that Shmuel is creating called Mitzvah Machmas Misa. Whenever it is clear, either through your words or through the context, that the only reason you're giving this gift is because you think you're going to die, so that is like a gift al Tanai. Whether there was a Kinyan, not a Kinyan, if the person doesn't die, then Lamais, again, the gift is voided.
When do you apply that? What makes something machmas misa?
So either again when a person says it, like in the case, let's just of Rav Dimi, I'm going to die, and my brother's not even coming to visit me, or it's clear that again the only reason is gifting away his property from the context.
The fact that the Shchimira itself doesn't make this.
That we're going to see. That's what we're going to see. Eisvei. Eisvei Mashashel Rava. So remember Shasha brought up, we asked the question on Rava. The Gemara said, Maisa be'iman shel b'nei Rochel, Shaisa Chola. So we'll say the mother of the sons of Rochel. Rochel is the father's name. So the mother of the sons of Rochel, so it was a Shchimira, Shaisa Chola. Va'amra, Tinasein kibinasi lebiti. She had a pin. She had a very expensive pin, and she wanted to give her pin to her daughter. V'hu b'shnei masar mana. And we'll say that pin was worth 12 mana, a very expensive pin. Umeisa, and she died. V'kaimu devareha. And the rabbis ultimately upheld to her. Now, what's novel about that case? Take a look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam says, "V'kaimu chacham mes devareha." It's about 6 lines up from the bottom. Afapi de matnas b'miktas below kinyan habi timidiktani devareha kayim mishad below kinyan hu. Let's listen to this. This was a case where she was a shchimera. She was gifting property, but it was only partial property, right? There was no kinyan. Yet the chachamim upheld her word. So what do you see from there? You see from there, both say that even a partial gift has the ability to be like a matna shchimera. So what do you see from here? Hasam b'mitzvah machmas misa. They both say the difference in that case, they both say, is that is a case of mitzvah machmas misa. They both say that is clear, where a person is giving the gift, ultimately again, because of their impending death. Look at the Rashbam. B'mitzvah machmas misa, she'eskira d'midaigos misahi mechalekes. So both say, listen to this. The way the Rashbam explains mitzvah machmas misa, both say, is that a person explicitly says that they're giving the gift because they're about to die. So we'll say we seem to now have 2 different categories. A classic matna shchimira is where a person doesn't have to mention death. It's clear, as David just mentioned before, from the fact that they are a shchivmira, that is a matna shchimira. So if a person's on their deathbed and they're giving away their estate, that's called a matna shchimira, even if they don't mention death once. Then there's another category. Then the category is mitzvah machmas misa. Mitzvah machmas misa, where a person explicitly articulates that the reason they're giving this gift is why? Because they are about to die. So both say mitzvah machmas misa works even on partial property transfers. So even if I'm not conveying my entire estate, just part of an estate, if I articulate that I'm giving it away because I'm dying, then that has a status also of a matna shchimera. Look at the Rashbam once more. She's saying, I'm giving this away because I'm about to die. The mitzvah machmas misa lo by kinyan. Hecha demes ben ikashir ben lechashir v'hakabaskin. I will say now the novelty over here is the following. And with this, we'll have to stop over here. But we know that the novelty of matna shchimira abosai is what? What's the novelty of matna shchimira? That is kichsuvin v'chimsurin damu. Right? That it's as if it's recorded in the Shabbos, as if there was a kinyan. But matna shchimira only applies to what, Rabosai? Only applies to what? When you're giving away everything. The Gemara now is introducing us to a new concept called mitzvah machmas misa. That when you explicitly articulate that you're giving away property because you are about to die, so even though you're only giving away some property but not other property, that conveyance becomes like a matna shchimira and is effective even without a kinyan, but even though you are still retaining property for yourself. This is going to be called a mitzvah machmas misa. We'll stop over. We'll pick up Emirat Hashem with this category tomorrow. You have to express it. Context is only by shchimera. By mitzvah machmas misa, which is a partial, correct, all or nothing. If you want mitzvah machmas misa, meaning a partial conveyance that has the power of a matna shchimera, there has to be an explicit articulation.
I think you have to get the partial